Hi friends and welcome back. This is Jennifer McGuire. So a few days ago I showed how to easily create a pop-up inside of a card, and I will link to that video here in case you missed it. Well, today is a spin-off of that video, and I'm going to show how to do a pop-up scene inside of a trifold card. Now you can use this technique with any stamps or dies you may have. Even border dies are great for this. And I have two examples for you today. I think it's best to start off by seeing the completed card so you know in which direction we're headed. From the outside, it's a simple card, but then when you open it and fold the trifold down, you get this pop-up scene that is so much fun to do. Now this card and my next card feature the Hero Arts My Monthly Hero July kit. I am so excited about this kit because look at the beautiful layering images there are in that stamp set. That's a 6x8 stamp set, so these are big images, and they're very easy to layer. You can use different pieces of it together for different looks. There's mountains, there's trees, there's a dock, there's water, all kinds of things, so you can create a different scene each time. There are also the dies that you see below, the cardstock, some embossing powder, and inks, all included in this kit. And it's a great price point because the cost is about half the value. I really don't use any card kits besides the Hero Arts kits because I find that they're packed full of useful product that I can use over and over again. Okay, let's get started with stamping. I have some heavyweight white cardstock here, and I'm using my MISTI stamping tool. I find that tool very helpful when I'm stamping a scene like I am today. However, you could use an acrylic block if you prefer. I'm also going to be using Hero Arts Reactive inks. These are a hybrid ink that have some properties of dye inks and pigment inks together. And you'll see me take advantage of those properties throughout this video, and I'll talk about that. However, you can use any inks that you want for this. Any would work. And I'm starting out by stamping the tree border. And the tree border is a little bit more narrow than I wanted, so I'm just double stamping it to make it wider. Okay, now I'm coming in with the second layer of the tree border. The first green color I used was green apple, and this one is actually blue raspberry. But when I layer it over the green, it just looks like a darker green. That's one of the great things about hybrid inks is you can layer them to get really cool looks and new colors. Next, I need some masking paper. I'm using Gina masking paper for this card because I find that it holds up through lots of inking. I die cut using the coordinating border die for that tree that's included in the kit. And now I'm going to put this piece of masking paper over that tree line, but I'll shift it down just a little bit. I find when you're inking a background and there's a mask, it's best to offset that a bit. Another nice thing about using the magic masking paper from Gina is it holds up, so you can use it for several cards. Okay, so now I'm masking the mountain image with the Hero Arts Reactive Fog ink. And then I'm using a sponge dauber to just kind of blend some color against that masked edge because I want the color to fill in there. Sometimes when you stamp against a masked edge, it doesn't ink up all the way to the edge, so I use the tool to help with that. Now I'm coming in with the second layer of the mountaintop. This time I'm using Sea Salt Reactive ink, which is white. And because this has some pigment properties, you'll be able to see this white on top of the color we just stamped. I want this to be subtle, but I did stamp it a few times just to make it stand out more. It will allow some of the color to show through, but not all of it, so you just get this soft white look. After removing the masking paper, I could see a little bit of bright white at the tops of the trees. I like a little bit of that white there. I think it looks like a highlight, but if it's too much white for you, you can use a small inking tool such as the Fantastix, which I'm using here, and a matching ink to kind of fill in some of those white areas. Once I'm done with that, I'm taking another piece of masking magic paper and putting that over our stamping so that I can apply some blue ink to the bottom area. I want this to look like a lake. I'm starting out with the Splash Reactive ink, and I'm using an ink blending tool to apply that. I'm not carrying too much to blend it because I plan to put more colors on top. Towards the center, I put some blue raspberry. Towards the top, I'm putting white, so some of the white reactive ink to kind of create a highlight up there. And then I also put a little bit of the Blue Hawaii deeper blue on the bottom. And there we have our fun scene so far. Now we need to use the coordinating die for the mountains. Cut that from some masking paper. And now I'm going to put that over the mountains so that I can create my sky. There are different orders that you can do this in, but this is the one that made the most sense to me as I was creating. This time I only want a soft amount of color in the sky. So instead of an ink blending tool, which I use when I want a lot of color, I'm using a Picket Fence life-changing brush. This has soft little bristles and is excellent for applying soft, even color. I'm using the Splash Reactive ink, which is what I used for the water, but since I'm only putting a little bit of this down, I'll have a much softer look. I then am coming in with the Sponge Dauber and the white Reactive ink to create what looks kind of like clouds in the sky. It's very subtle, but it does make a big difference in the end scene. And I'm thrilled with how this is coming out. I'm not an artist on my own. I couldn't paint this myself, so the fact that I just used stamps and inks to create this makes me very happy. Now I'm adding some little ripples into the water using the splash ink and also some of the sea salt white ink. And by the way, all of these images so far are from that kit stamp set. I'm also adding little birds in the sky using the fog because I want it to be a little more subtle. Now on another piece of white cardstock, I have the dock image, the first layer of the dock image, and I'm inking that up and stamping that with soft brown shadow ink from Hero Arts. On top of that, I have the second layer, and this one I'll stamp with the Cup of Joe ink. Again, whatever inks you have will work for this technique. Okay, I also stamped several little grass images from the kit using the Key Lime ink, and then I thought that was a little too bright, so I'm using a Sponge Dauber with the green apple ink to add a little bit of the darker green ink to the bottom of the stamped images, and then stamping them again directly on top. This gives me a two-tone look to those grass pieces. After stamping a bunch of those, I'm adding a little brown to the top of these. So again, I'm adding yet another color to these images. But it was only one stamp. I just faked it with some extra ink and marker. After I had all of these images completed, I used the coordinating dies to cut them out. Okay, so we have all of our pieces ready now to assemble the card. For this card, you're going to need a top folding white note card. That's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, which is what I typically use in my videos. From one side, you're going to cut about 3 inches off. This particular trifold card will have a smaller flap on the inside, so that the top of my scene can show through the window on the front of the card, which you'll see in a moment. So I'm going to glue my inked piece inside of this. You'll have the flap there on the bottom so that it'll fold down when you open up the card. We'll add the rest of the card later on. Now it's time to create the pop-up feature for our dock. To do this, I have a piece of white cardstock that is 1 1/2 inches by 3 1/2 inches. And I'm scoring it at 1/2 inch, 1 1/2 inches, 2 inches, and 3 inches. I've got all those measurements on the top there if you want to take a screenshot. After I have these scored, I'm going to fold at each of those score lines. I'll end up with what looks like a shoebox that's open on the sides. I'll take one of the small flaps on one end and put strong tape on it. This is Fawn double-sided tape, but strong liquid adhesive works also. I'll then attach the two flaps together, and there we have our open-ended shoebox. So I'll call this feature a shoebox from now on. In my last video, I did a cube shape, but really either would work for this. Now we need to attach this to the back of our dock. So I'm using some strong double-sided tape once again, putting it on one side of our shoebox, and I'll put this on the back bottom of the dock. So I'm putting it right on the back, making sure the bottom of the shoebox lines up with the bottom of the dock. Okay, now we're going to put some more strong adhesive on the other side of the shoebox and on the bottom of the shoebox. Again, I used double-sided tape, but you could use liquid adhesive. I decided to use a little bit of both just in case, since the tape didn't really cover that whole side, and I want this all to stay together nicely. Okay, so now I've got adhesive on the other side of the shoebox and the bottom, and we're going to put that into the crease of our trifold here. So I'll just press it in there, and I'm going to hold it there for a few minutes to dry. Okay, while that completely dries, I'm stamping this little boy and girl with Stazon Jet Black Ink onto a piece of acetate. I'm just using some thick acetate that I found from leftover packaging. I'm going to easily dry that just a little bit with my heat gun. I don't want to warp the acetate. After I'm sure the ink is dry, I'm using the coordinating dies and placing those right around our stamped images. Now I'm going to do partial die cutting with my die cut machine. Notice that the edge of the cutting plate has the feet hanging out. So only the top of the body will cut, and the feet that are hanging out the bottom of the cutting plate won't cut. Now I'm cutting a stilt from the bottom of these pieces. So you can see how the top of the little girl is cut out with the die, and on the bottom I have this clear stilt that will allow me to make her float inside of our card. On the bottom of that stilt, I'm doing a little fold, so there's like a little foot at the bottom of it. I'm putting some double-sided tape on the top of that little foot, so you can see that the tape is exposed on the bottom there. And then I will put that right on top of our pop-up feature. That way this little girl is sticking up and floating, and it looks like she's jumping off the dock. So let's do that again. On the other one, I'll put a little fold at the bottom of the stilt. On the top of that little fold, I'll put some tape, and then I'll tape that on to our pop-up feature. I'm not removing the release paper from the top of that tape. I'm just using it to hold those little images in place. So you can see how it looks like they're floating and jumping off the dock. Now I'm going to use some liquid adhesive to glue our little grass images so it looks like they're peeking out the side of the dock. Okay, now it's time to add the rest of the card. So I have another top folding white note card that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and it'll slip over that piece that we just created. However, first I need to die cut a circle on the front of our note card so that it'll show through to the scene inside. This is a Hero Arts Circle Infinity die. I'm going to place it towards the top of my note card and run it through my die cut machine, creating a circle window. So when I put this piece inside, you'll be able to see through to the scene inside, which I think is really fun. Okay, I need a sentiment to stamp inside that window. I decided to use the Thinking of You sentiment from this Hero Arts Lake Time Fun stamp set. This is another sweet set that coordinates really well with the kit that I showed you earlier. Okay, so I have my card just held together here in my MISTI, so I can line up my greeting inside of that window. So I'll close my MISTI on that. Now I'm going to remove the outside of the note card so there's less bulk. I'm going to tape my little fold down here so it doesn't get in the way. And then I'll stamp that greeting with Altenew Obsidian Black Ink, which is a great fine black pigment ink. I'm then adding clear embossing powder from Hero Arts and heat setting it so that sentiment has some shine and dimension to it, and it'll stand out more. Next, I used 2 circle dies that are close in size, the ones that you see there on the top right, and I cut them together from some shimmer cardstock. And I'm placing that around our window on the front just to give it a finished look. Okay, now we can assemble our card. I'm putting some strong adhesive on the inside flap, making sure to put quite a bit because we want this to stay put. Now I'm putting our inked piece on the inside and then closing the card around it. Okay, so now we've got our completed card. Wanted to show you it doesn't have too much bulk in our envelope here. When you take it out of the envelope, you can see the little scene at the top of the card. It looks simple from here, but you do have a little bit of shine to that sentiment thanks to the embossing. So now when you open up the card, there's a little flap that you pull down to show that fun dock scene with the kids jumping off. So you could do any scene that you want here, any border dies along the bottom. You can change up the size of the little pop-up feature that we created, and then you just write your little personal sentiment there on that bottom flap. I think this is a fun way to add a special surprise inside of your card. Okay, so now that we've done one card, let's do a second. This one will be a landscape card, and it'll be a full trifold design too. So let's look at the completed card. From the outside, it looks pretty simple. There's the first fold, and you can see the same scene. And then when you open it up, there's this cute scene with the bear. So this definitely has a surprise inside. And I did 2 layers of pop-up on this. Along with the Hero Arts July kit, I also used the new Hero Arts Camp in the Wild stamp set. I thought that bear was super cute, and I really like the message that says, "You're the berry best." Along with this, I used another Hero Arts stamp set that they've released to coordinate with the kit. This is the Hero Arts Smores Bonfire stamp set. I really like the grading that says, "I'm a happy camper when you're around," and you could use the little tent image with that. But for this card, I'm using the moon and the stars on the top. So let's start creating our pop-up borders. I went ahead and stamped the first layer of the trees with Hero Arts Field Greens ink. On top of that, I'm going to stamp the layer image with the Hero Arts Green Apple Reactive ink. Remember, this is a partially pigment ink, so that green will actually show up even though we're stamping on a darker color of ink. And you can see the fun layered look we get. I am making a wider card this time, so I do need to stamp the border twice in order to cover it, but it's easy to do. After cutting the top of that border, I'm using a sponge dauber and the Hero Arts Fog ink just to add some color. I don't like to leave that edge white, so this kind of covers it with color, and then I also added some on the bottom just to add a little depth to those trees. Next, I need a little border of green grass for our little bear to sit on. Instead of using colored cardstock, I just used white cardstock and heavily applied the green apple ink, and then added a little bit of darker color with the blue raspberry ink and an ink blending tool. I then cut that with my trimmer, and we have a little grassy hill to sit on. Now I wanted to make this look like it had some texture to it. So I have a microfiber cloth here. It's the one that I normally use to clean up my work surface and stamps. And I'm spraying it lightly with water. And I'm just lightly pressing that onto that ink. This ink reacts with water, and check it out, you get this soft texture to it because the bumps on the cloth and the water leave little dots on the inked background. After drying it, you can see the fun texture that we get. It really adds a lot to that grassy hill. Okay, so now I have our treetop piece. I forgot that I wanted that bottom to be solid green so that when you look above on the card, you don't see the white below. So I just put some green ink over it, and now I'm using an ink blending tool to spread it out, and we have that piece done. Okay, now for the sky piece, I started with 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch white cardstock, and I covered it heavily with Splash Reactive ink. Along one edge, I'm using an ink blending tool and the darker blue Hawaii ink to add a bit more color. And along the other edge, I'll use an ink blending tool and the Thistle Reactive ink just to add a little bit of purple to that edge. Just adding those extra colors helps to build the depth in the sky, but you could definitely use regular cardstock here if you just want a solid blue sky. Next, I have a side-folding white note card that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I've opened it up upside down, and I'm filling that inside with some strong adhesive and adding our inked sky. So that flap there on the bottom is the flap that will fold down when you open the card. Next, I'm stamping some mountains that will be kind of off in the background. So I'm stamping this with the blue Hawaii ink, so it stands out just a little bit against that background. So I stamped the first layer twice to cover the width of the card, and then I came in with the second layer of the mountains and stamped that again with the sea salt ink. Now it's time to create the pop-up features for this card. This time I'm starting with a bigger piece of white cardstock that's 3 1/2 inches wide. It doesn't matter how tall. I'm scoring at 1/2 inch, 1 1/2 inches, 2 inches, and 3 inches. Then I'm going to cut that into 1-inch strips. So there are a few ways you can do these pop-up features, different sizes. You can play around with it. This one will be small little shoe boxes compared to ones I did earlier. So I fold along those score lines on each of these, and then I glue the end flaps together, and there we have our tiny little open-ended shoebox. I created a few extras so that I have them ready for future cards. So it's time to add our first pop-up border. So I'm starting with that hill border. On the back, I'm going to glue 2 of the pop-up shoe boxes. So I put adhesive on one side of the shoebox and glued it right to the bottom of our border. I'm actually going to do 2 pop-up features on the back of this border because I want it to pop up nicely and it's pretty long. So I'm putting another pop-up feature on the other one. You want to make sure the bottom of your shoebox lines up with the bottom of your border. Okay, now we're going to put some adhesive on the other side of the shoebox and on the bottom of the shoebox. This will allow us to glue this inside of our card up against the crease of the card. So I've got my card here and I'm pressing that right in there, and I'm going to hold that for a few minutes to let it dry. Now remember, on this particular card, I'm going to have 2 borders that pop up, and you can see that in the image here. So we have our grassy border piece. However, I cut it too short. I didn't want to redo it, so all I'm going to do is glue a piece of white cardstock on the bottom. It'll just look like a border under there, and that way I'm making this grassy border taller, and it'll cover more of our tree line that's popped up already. I'm going to create smaller pop-up features for this one. This time I'm starting with cardstock that's 2.5 inches wide. I'm scoring it at 1/2 inch, 1 inch, 1.5 inches, and 2 inches. So basically every 1/2 inch. I then am going to cut these to be a 1/2 inch wide, so I can cut a bunch of them at once. And again, I'm creating extras so that I can save them for future cards. As before, I'm just folding along the score lines and gluing the 2 end flaps together. This time we end up with a little cube, which is very similar to the last video that I did using this technique. And again, I've linked to that up here and below if you want to check that out. So now I'm putting glue on one side of the cube and putting it on the back of our little grassy hill. Remember to always put it right up against the bottom of your border. And I put 2, and this time I put them towards the center. Now I'm putting adhesive on the bottom of those cubes and on the back of the cubes. We're going to put this into our card, pressing it up to our hillside border. The reason I put these cubes in the center instead of the outside edge is we already have a lot of bulk on the outside edge because we put the pop-up features there for the last border. So this spreads the bulk out a bit. By the way, I've already white heat embossed my sentiment on that grassy border before I assembled it, and I added the little bear. Now I'm using my fingertip and the white reactive ink to create a little highlight in the sky, and then I'm gluing a moon right in the center. For the outside of our card, I have a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card, and I die cut a circle at the center. I again created a silver ring to glue around that just for a little finishing touch. In the inside of the card, I'm putting lots of liquid adhesive. Actually, not a lot, just spread it out pretty good. And then I glued the rest of my card on the inside, and I'll hold it there so that it has some time to dry. Off screen, I die cut a large circle and I inked and stamped on it using the same techniques and products that I used in this video. I then white heat embossed a thank you greeting on that and added a moon. And I'm gluing it on the inside trifold so that it shows through perfectly when the card is closed. So let's look at the completed card. When you take it out of the envelope, you see a very simple card design, just that little night scene showing through the center there. However, when you open the card, you see the trifold design, and when you open that flap, you've got the pop-up scene with the cute little bear sitting there. I think that's just such a fun surprise. And you have the 3 layers in that scene. You've got the mountains in the background, you've got the treetops, and you have the grassy hill. On that white part on the bottom, you can write your message. If you wanted to, you could extend the scene down there by extending the grass or the inking, but I like having the white on the bottom. So there you have a way to use a pop-up feature with the trifold card design. It's a great way to create a scene on the inside of your card. If you're interested in these products or anything I featured here today, they are linked below in my YouTube description. In the middle are a couple other videos for you to watch if you have some time. Thanks for spending this time with me. I hope you'll return again soon and have a wonderful week.